On November 14, 2025, a new chapter began in Pakistan's constitutional history. President Asif Ali Zardari signed into law the 27th Amendment, a piece of legislation that fundamentally alters the country's governance. Passed with remarkable speed just a day earlier by the National Assembly, this amendment has become the center of intense national debate. It introduces sweeping changes to the powers and structures of both the judiciary and the military. Supporters, led by Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, argue that these reforms are necessary for creating what they call institutional harmony. They believe the changes will streamline decision-making and ensure stability in a complex political landscape. However, the rapid journey of this bill through Parliament has raised many questions. The Cabinet first approved the draft on November 8, 2025. By November 13th, it had cleared both houses of Parliament with overwhelming majorities, but without the participation of the main opposition party, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf. PTI members boycotted the vote, dramatically tearing up copies of the bill in protest. This lack of broad political consensus and public consultation has fueled criticism. Opponents view the amendment not as a step toward harmony, but as a constitutional surrender that dangerously concentrates power in the hands of the executive and the military establishment. The context surrounding the amendment's passage is critical to understanding its implications. Pakistan has been navigating a period of significant political tension. Key opposition figures, including former Prime Minister Imran Khan, remain imprisoned, and public protests have been heavily restricted. This environment of political repression has led many to question the legitimacy of such a profound constitutional overhaul. The speed of the process, combined with the silencing of dissenting voices, has created a deep sense of unease among civil society groups, legal experts, and those who fear for the future of Pakistan's democratic framework and the delicate balance of power between state institutions. At its core, the 27th Amendment is more than just a legal document. It represents a significant power shift. It redraws the lines of authority that have long defined the state. The law creates new positions of immense power, shields top officials from accountability, and redefines the role of the country's highest courts. As the nation grapples with these changes, the central question remains: will this amendment lead to a more stable and efficient state, as its proponents claim, or will it erode the democratic principles and checks and balances that are essential for a fair and just society? The answer will unfold in the years to come. The 27th Amendment brings about a dramatic restructuring of Pakistan's judicial system, arguably the most significant since the country's founding. The centerpiece of this reform is the creation of a new, powerful body, the Federal Constitutional Court, or FCC. This court is granted exclusive jurisdiction over all constitutional matters. That means it alone will hear cases involving disputes between the federal government and the provinces, or interpret the Constitution itself. The establishment of the FCC effectively sidelines the existing Supreme Court, which has historically been the final arbiter of constitutional law. This change is designed to create a specialized forum for constitutional issues, but, critics are deeply concerned about its potential for political influence. The process for appointing judges to this new federal constitutional court is a major point of contention. Under the new law, FCC judges will be appointed by the Prime Minister and subsequently approved by the President. This gives the executive branch unprecedented control over the composition of the country's highest constitutional body. The court will consist of a Chief Justice and an equal number of judges from each of Pakistan's 4 provinces and the Islamabad Capital Territory. While this structure is presented as a way to ensure provincial representation, many legal scholars fear that it will lead to the politicization of judicial appointments, creating a court that is compliant with the government's agenda, rather than an independent check on its power. Consequently, the role and stature of the Supreme Court have been significantly diminished. Once the apex court of the land, its name has been formally changed from the Supreme Court of Pakistan to simply the Supreme Court. More importantly, it has been stripped of its original constitutional jurisdiction and is now relegated to being an appellate court for civil and criminal cases. Furthermore, another crucial change affects the Judicial Commission of Pakistan, the body responsible for all judicial appointments. The Chief Justice of Pakistan's casting vote within the JCP has been eliminated, further eroding the judiciary's independence and opening the door for greater political maneuvering in the selection of judges across the country. Adding to these concerns is a new provision that grants the president the power to transfer high court judges between provinces based on the JCP's recommendation, even without the judge's consent. A judge who refuses such a transfer could face forced retirement or accountability proceedings. This measure is seen by many in the legal community as a tool to pressure and control judges who may rule against the government. Senior figures, including Justice Mansoor Ali Shah, have warned that these changes collectively risk the collapse of an independent judiciary, turning the courts into instruments of executive will rather than guardians of the Constitution and citizens' rights. The 27th Amendment formally cements the military's preeminent role in Pakistan's power structure through several key institutional changes. The most significant of these is the creation of the new post of Chief of Defense Forces. This position replaces the largely ceremonial role of the Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff Committee. The amendment explicitly states that the Chief of the Army Staff will hold the title of Chief of Defense Forces, granting this single individual direct command authority over the Army, Navy, and Air Force. This consolidation of military power under one Army general is a monumental shift, formalizing a command structure that concentrates immense authority in a way never before seen in Pakistan's history. The first person to assume this powerful new role will be Field Marshal Asim Munir. Having been promoted to the 5-star rank in May 2025, following a border conflict with India, he is now set to become the inaugural Chief of Defense Forces. The amendment doesn't just grant him unprecedented power, it also provides him with extraordinary legal protection. The law grants lifetime immunity from any criminal prosecution to all officers who hold a 5-star rank. This means that individuals like Field Marshal Munir can never be held legally accountable for their actions, even after they have left office. This provision has drawn fierce criticism for placing military leaders above the law and undermining the fundamental principle of equal justice for all citizens. Beyond personal immunity, the amendment further entrenches the power of the Chief of Defense Forces by making their removal from office exceedingly difficult. To remove a 5-star officer, a 2/3 majority vote in Parliament is now required. This is a higher threshold than what is needed to remove an elected Prime Minister and their government. This high bar for removal ensures that the head of the armed forces enjoys a level of job security far greater than that of the country's elected leadership, further tilting the civil-military balance in favor of the armed forces. Critics argue this makes the military leadership virtually unaccountable to civilian oversight, a cornerstone of any democratic system. Finally, the amendment establishes a new National Strategic Command. This body will be responsible for overseeing all of Pakistan's strategic assets, including its nuclear arsenal. The head of the National Strategic Command will be an army officer appointed in consultation with the Chief of Defense Forces. This move effectively places the nation's most sensitive security apparatus firmly under the control of the army leadership. Taken together, these military reforms represent a constitutional formalization of the military's long-standing influence over Pakistan's politics and security, a change that many believe moves the country further away from a genuine democracy and towards a more authoritarian, military-dominated state. The 27th Amendment has cleaved a deep divide in Pakistani society, with supporters and opponents offering starkly different visions of its impact. Proponents, primarily from the ruling coalition government, defend the law as a pragmatic step toward stability. They argue that by clarifying the roles of the judiciary and the military, the amendment will reduce institutional friction and allow the government to function more effectively. The creation of the Federal Constitutional Court, they claim, will lead to more efficient handling of constitutional cases, while the empowerment of the Chief of Defense Forces will strengthen national security coordination. In their view, these changes are not a power grab, but a necessary rebalancing to create a stronger, more harmonious state. On the other side stands a broad coalition of critics, including opposition parties, the legal community, human rights activists, and journalists. They see the amendment as a direct assault on Pakistan's democratic foundations. They argue that creating a new constitutional court appointed by the executive is a blatant attempt to create a compliant judiciary, one that will rubber-stamp government actions rather than hold them to account. A provision within the amendment even bars any court from questioning a constitutional change on any ground whatsoever, effectively eliminating judicial review and dismantling a key check on parliamentary and executive power. This, they warn, is a recipe for unchecked authority and tyranny. The new immunities granted by the amendment have drawn particularly sharp condemnation. The decision to provide lifetime immunity from criminal proceedings to both the president and five-star military officers is seen as a profound betrayal of the rule of law. Critics argue that no official, regardless of their rank or position, should be placed above the law. Granting such protections creates a special class of untouchable elites, eroding the principle that all citizens are equal before the law. This is seen not as a measure for stability, but as a mechanism to ensure that the most powerful figures in the country are never held accountable for their decisions or actions. Ultimately, the debate over the 27th Amendment is a debate about the very nature of power and democracy in Pakistan. It forces the nation to confront whether it is moving toward a more centralized, authoritarian model of governance, or whether it can preserve the fragile democratic checks and balances it has struggled to build over decades. For many, the amendment formalizes the hybrid system in which the military has long held de facto power. But now, with constitutional sanction, the law's passage in a climate of political repression has only deepened fears that Pakistan is on a path that weakens democratic institutions and silences dissent, leaving its future uncertain.